Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Stay Connected with the Worcester Senior Center. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Hirsch, the Medical Director for the Division of Public Health for the City of Worcester, and love doing these sessions with you. Today we're going to be talking about things that are happening in the dog days of summer. That's August. That's the last full month of summer. And we've had a pretty tough summer as far as dog days go, heat-wise. It's been the hottest June ever recorded. It's been the hottest July ever recorded. And we're not expecting much of a relief in August. We always had hot Augusts. That's something that we should be used to, but it seems like our imagination of what we remember as kids for a hot August is nothing like what we're experiencing. Here in July, we had some really humid, hot days, very, very tough to get around. We had all of our cooling stations here in the city working, the library, the Y, and the senior center. And we still had a lot of people that were coming to the emergency rooms dehydrated. Very important thing, don't go anywhere without your bottle of water, your canteen, whatever you use to hydrate yourself. In this kind of weather, particularly if you're driving around, you get stuck in traffic and you haven't had enough liquid diet during the day, it's always good to have a bottle of water in the car, a bottle of water on you, so that you can keep yourself hydrated. So what can I tell you about August? There's a lot going on. As far as the month itself, it's named after Caesar Augustus, the Emperor of Rome. And it's always been traditionally known as a very warm month, at least in the northern hemisphere. In the southern hemisphere, it's the equivalent weather of February. So there it's generally a cold month. But up here in our neck of the woods, it's a warm month. And it has the gladiola as a month flower. And in general, it's been a month where a lot of things have happened of great portent for the United States. We had in World War II the two nuclear bombs that were dropped to try to end the Japanese involvement in the war were on August 6th and August 9th. And there are big commemorations of those events in Japan. Here we don't celebrate it quite as much. August 15th in Japan is also known as End of the War Day, and they lay wreaths on their fallen soldiers and sailors that participated. We generally don't celebrate VJ, Victory in Japan Day, until September 2nd, which is when the instrument of surrender was signed by General MacArthur and all the Japanese dignitaries off of the deck of the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. I know a lot about that because my dear departed father-in-law was in a B-29 doing a flyover over the Missouri, and he got in his bombardier's seat, got to see a lot of that ceremony. Also in August, we had on August 9th, President Nixon back in 1974 resigned. And these are the kind of things that kind of shake you up from your summer doldrums. A lot of people are out on the beach, taking vacations. They don't want to really think about politics, but there's a lot of politics going on right now here in the United States. And we have Democratic convention coming up in August, we have a president that has already decided not to run, and he's passed the baton over to his vice president. And this is going to be a very interesting political season until November 5th when the election happens. As far as what has been going on in August traditionally, August is interesting. It has the first full week of August is known as National Farmers Market Week. And we have some wonderful farmers markets here in Worcester. And they really help to not only get healthy produce into the diet of our local Worcester residents, but they also help to sell the same product to a lot of the local grocery stores in the neighborhoods so that people can get it, other days than just when the farmer's market is there. That's a program that the Department of Public Health started back in 2015. So it's almost 10 years of doing this, and it's been very successful. And a lot of our young people who ordinarily would only be eating kind of fried foods or potentially, fast foods, get introduced to some really healthy veggies, salads, and things like that through this program. The first Tuesday of August is known as National Night Out Day. And what it's supposed to mean is that individual communities want to take back the night from the folks that can make the nights in the summer dangerous. People that are in gangs, people that are pushing drugs, people that are making it uncomfortable to go to the local parks or take a walk. So UMass Memorial Healthcare has always participated in a National Night Out Day, usually around the Memorial Hospital campus. And I've helped to park many of our injury prevention vehicles there for the kids to go through and learn a little bit about summer safety. And it is a kind of a very reaffirming kind of feeling when you see so many different organizations in the community, and then the community itself come out and say, we're not going to be intimidated into hiding in our dwellings. We're going to come out and take back the night. So National Night Out is a very good one. And the last thing about August that I like is that it's also National Immunization Safety Month. And it's supposed to recognize the fact that as you're going to have your kids come back to school, you have to make sure that they're properly immunized. And that's where I'll start telling you a little bit about the current events that we saw in the month of July. So one thing we saw for the first time in many, many years here in the Commonwealth, there was a case of measles. Measles is one of the most contagious of the viral illnesses, and it had almost been totally wiped out because almost all of the children were getting measles, mumps, and rubella vaccines together. But some of our new migrants that have come here haven't gotten those immunizations, and some young parents have gotten on the anti-vaccine trail, and they are exposing their kids to getting this. Now, this particular case you can trace to one person. It was a person that spent some time in Europe, came over here, went to a ceremony, I think a graduation ceremony at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. All these little side trips were with public transportation, and he contracted the measles. And when he did, they had to do quite a bit of contact tracing to figure out who was on the bus when and who was, possibly near him at the graduation ceremony, and who was at the airport with him when he returned from Europe. All this has led to just one case of measles, and hopefully it'll stay at that level. COVID, still with us. The KP3 and KP3.1 variants that are also called the FLIRT variants represent about half the cases. We haven't been struck as hard as the Midwest and the South here in Worcester. We have seen a number of employees calling out with the COVID test being positive, but we haven't seen a huge influx of COVID positive patients. We've had several patients that have come in with other ailments and then incidentally have tested positive for COVID. So this is a surge that's more than last year in the summer, but nowhere near some of the winter surges we've had with Omicron this past winter and Delta in previous winters. So it's not that I'm trying to minimize it, and it is relatively preventable if you kept up with your COVID vaccinations, especially if you're in those high-risk groups, over 65, obese, diabetic, cardiac disease, pulmonary disease, immune disease. That group should be kept up to date. Now, the fall is probably going to bring us a new iteration of the vaccine that is going to be more specific to these most recent Omicron variants that we've been attacked by. And there's talk, anyway, I haven't seen it confirmed, that they may try to combine the flu vaccine with this new iteration of the Omicron vaccination. So you have to kind of keep your eyes and ears open. The CDC and the Mass Department of Public Health will guide us here in Worcester as to what we want to accomplish. And, it's different now. We're not going to have mass vaccination stations. We're not going to have free COVID tests available. It's kind of an individual responsibility now. COVID is going to be with us like the common cold, like the flu, for years to come. And I think we have to just incorporate it into our thoughts about, how we want to prevent us from missing significant time at work or in school, or spreading it to more vulnerable people if we're not vulnerable ourselves. We've had a few reports of outbreaks in nursing homes, so the elderly continue to be our most vulnerable age group. And we'll have to keep you posted as to what we will do if we see a higher uptick of the levels of COVID out there. We continue to monitor with BioBot analysis of our wastewater. And currently, as I sit here, the wastewater has been climbing, indicating a higher level of disease. But because we're not doing formal testing, and many people are mistakenly thinking that the cold or the sore throat that they have is not COVID. It's instead they're saying it's allergies, or maybe they had a sore throat because they're a little child was coming home from daycare coughing or something like that. They're not testing. So the testing numbers are not as accurate, but the trend numbers are pretty accurate with the wastewater, and we are seeing more COVID out there. The flu is going to be handled with another vaccine, but there has been a strain identified in Europe of flu that is resistant to the standard flu vaccines that we've been producing. And you probably know each year the scientists and the vaccine labs, they take a guess as to what they think is going to be the most prevalent kind of flu bug that we're going to see, and that's what they design their vaccine against. There have been years where they guessed very right, and we didn't see a lot of flu, and there are years where we guessed wrong, and there was a lot of flu. The one thing I can tell you is that, if you're not going to get vaccinated, and as the winter months kind of drive us inside more, because flu season really won't start until late September, early October. If you're worried about it, wear a mask. The year that we all wore masks, which was the winter of 2020 and 21, those 2 winters, the flu incidence went way down. So there's something to the mask. It definitely protects you from getting some of these airborne illnesses. There's a lot of second guessing about what we did about COVID. I was out there at our press conferences talking about the 3 W's all the time: wearing a mask, watching your distance, and being clever about your proximity to other people. So now what we've learned from hard retrospective evaluation, we thought initially that COVID spread by droplets, that when you sneezed or coughed or talked loudly, these little micro droplets would spill out of your mouth and nose, and they generally don't travel more than 4 feet. So everyone arrived at the idea that a 6-foot distance between people was a safe thing. That's why you see still vestiges of that. When you go to some stores, they'll have, where you should stand at 6 feet apart, and we use that a lot in school systems to figure out how many shifts of students we should have to reduce the density of the students. Now we know that instead of spreading by droplet, that COVID spreads by aerosol, which is kind of a vaporization process where the COVID germs float in the air. And you can get them 6 feet away, you can get them 10 feet away, you can get them in a room where somebody had COVID 5 minutes ago and left the room, and the aerosol is still there. So the distance thing is not as important as the washing of the hands and making sure you have a good mask. Don't throw your mask away yet. It's not over yet. What else did we see here in Central Mass and around the country? There's been an uptick of tick-borne illnesses. I didn't mean to make a pun out of that, but tick-borne illnesses from ticks being carried on deer, but other animals apparently are carrying it too. And it's not just Lyme's disease that they're carrying babesiosis, which is another form of tick-borne illness. And there was one death last month in Commonwealth of someone who died of babesiosis. There also is a new tick that has come from Texas, the longhorn tick, and it also carries a different kind of virus that can make you develop a meat allergy. So if you suddenly, bit into a juicy steak, you would break out in hives, get nauseous. So far, it hasn't been very common here, but that's what's being described in the South more. We've also had a problem with deli meats being contaminated with a bacteria. And so all of these things, believe it or not, are united by one triggering factor, and that is climate change. Climate change is driving viruses that never were in the north, because suddenly the climate is more compatible with the life cycle and desires of these insects. That is why instead of just looking after the mosquito-borne ailments that we're used to looking for, West Nile virus and EEE, Eastern Equine Encephalitis, now we've had 60 cases of what's called dengue fever, which we never saw except in the tropics of the Caribbean. And also another one called chikungunya. It's a tough word to say and to spell. The difference with the chikungunya and the virus that dengue is like, they're spread by mosquitoes that don't stay dormant during the day. So when we talk about trying to prevent EEE and West Nile, we talk about the 5 W's, right? We want you to wear long pants and long shirts, avoid dusk and dawn, so that's dress, dusk, and dawn. We want you to wear on exposed areas of your body insecticide called DEET, insect repellent called DEET that will help to keep the mosquitoes from biting you. And also, if there is standing water, stagnant water on your property, in rain barrels or old tires, things like that, try to get rid of that standing water because it's an excellent breeding place for these mosquitoes that carry EEE and West Nile. Now, the tiger mosquito that carries dengue and chikungunya, they are mostly in wooded areas and they love to be out during the day. So the dawn and dusk part of the 5 Ds is out the window. Still wearing long sleeves and long pants, wearing DEET as an insect repellent, and getting rid of standing water is a good idea. But if you're like an outdoors person and you're taking a walk in a very wooded area, a hike, that it's important to really look at that, because dengue it can be a very serious infection. It's still probably not at the level of EEE, but it's more than West Nile. And all of these illnesses start out with kind of a viral illness thing. You're feeling a little nauseous, lightheaded, maybe headaches, maybe you have a sore throat, maybe you have a low-grade fever, and if you have had an outdoor experience and you develop those kind of symptoms a couple of days later, have your doctor check you over, because there is a simple blood test you can do to look for dengue and chikungunya, and as well we have those same tests for EEE and West Nile. So all of these mosquitoes are propagating more readily because the winters that we've been having are milder. And so the larvae are able to kind of weather the winter, and the mosquitoes can make a lot of eggs during the spring, and then you get a big crop of mosquitoes. All related to climate. And the other one that most recently happened was in our beautiful ecotarium, which is a wonderful place. I don't know if you all have grandchildren or children that are of a particular age. I would say anywhere between 1 and at least 15. It's a wonderful learning center. It's got a lot of things going on. They lost their polar bear a few years ago, but now they have a mountain lion instead. And I can tell you, I just took my little 18-month-old there, and we had an absolute blast. There's so many things for kids to do, very interactive, and it's just a joy to hear all the screeching of the kids because they're so excited to be there. But they had a raccoon on the premises that was acting strangely. They called animal control, and the great animal control officers from the Worcester Police came, tested the raccoon, and he had rabies. Again, rabies is not unheard of here in our region. We've had rabid dogs, we've had rabid bats, we've had rabid raccoons before, but generally these are animals that are nocturnal, and they don't seem to interact with humans that much. But this one was apparently pretty aggressive and acting strangely, and good on the ecotarium staff for recognizing there was something wrong. So this is what I think is going to unfortunately be our new normal, is having to deal with a lot more of these threats of illness from animals around us and insects that live on these animals or bite these animals and pass that over to humans. We did have a 4th case last month of avian flu. It was in a worker on a dairy farm, and once again we believe it happened from a mosquito that bit the cows that were infected and then bit the human caretaker of those cows, and that's how the person got it. None of the 4 people that have had it have gotten it from another human, nor have they passed it on to another human. So far we haven't seen human transmission of that disease, the avian flu. But that's something that the departments of public health around the country are really worried about. And so, if you do happen to have a farmer in your midst who's taking care of cows, you have to be careful if that person develops fever, a headache, stiff neck, or any of those symptoms, because although there's no direct treatment for the avian flu, they are working on a vaccine. But for now, they have some antiviral medication that they can give you to reduce the symptoms of avian flu if, God forbid, you would get it. So I think August, if we're all careful, will actually be a fun month, particularly if you can get access to one of our city splash pads like the one we have over on Shrewsbury Street, or a pool. We have our pools open now in the city. Our lifeguards are in place, and I would urge you, if you do go, please thank the lifeguards for their service, because they're few and far between. It's been very hard to recruit enough to keep our pools open, and they deserve a lot of praise for taking on a job where their sole responsibility is looking out for others. We just had our surgical graduation ceremonies at UMass, and I had the honor of presenting one of our graduating residents, Julia Rizzo, who is now going off to Springfield to do a fellowship, but she's from a neighboring town of Stowe. And I mention her because one of the real character building things that she did as a youth was becoming a lifeguard. And you could see how she took care of the medical students and the residents, and also the attendings, who are the senior-most people in the group, like an earth mother. And I think that spirit of watching out for everyone all the time was imbued in her when she was a lifeguard. So if we want to see our pools staffed with good people that have been treated with respect and have a pledge to do this until they're off to college or they're off to some other job that's full-time and they don't have time for doing this in the summer, you got to say something nice about them when you go to the pools. And that's the best way I can think of to avoid some of the August heat. So only other thing I wanted to mention was the Board of Health is going to have a renewed discussion on September 9th about gun violence, because we've had an uptick in gun violence here in the WU. Fortunately not in gun fatality, although we have had some fatalities. But I think that the shot spotter technology that allows the Worcester police to get to the scene much quicker, because they hear the audio imprint of a gunshot, they're sending out a team right then and there to where it was heard. If they get that gunshot wound victim to our trauma team sooner, the rate of survival is much, much better. And our trauma team, knock on wood, at UMass is exemplary. And they're talented, and boy, do they love the opportunity of trying to turn a tragedy around by saving a person who comes in with one or two significant gunshot wounds. And I've seen that hundreds of times now. It's a well-oiled trauma system. So, but it works the best because we're detecting these guns earlier. But that's not upstream enough. You know this story of the two friends are playing near some river and they see little babies floating down the river with in a basket, almost like Moses was floating down the river in a basket. And one of the friends jumps in the water and starts pulling the baskets out with the babies in it, and his other friend isn't doing anything, and so starts to run away, and the one friend is pulling the babies out. So they said, what are you doing? I need help pulling the babies out. He says, I'm going upstream to figure out who's putting these babies in the baskets. And that is kind of an allegory for what we would like to do with this gun violence. Just putting criminals in jail it has never been shown to cut down on this violence. Just figuring out, how to solve a crime of who is the perpetrator and who is the victim, or, if it involves a robbery or drugs, tracing the drugs back. That's not enough. What we have to do is figure out, how did those perpetrators get their gun, and why can't we do more as a community to discourage these young men, and they're 98% men of color, from going out on the street packing weapons. Sometimes we make incorrect decisions with the best of intentions. This happened in the 80s in New York City. It happened in the 90s in Pittsburgh. It happened here in Boston in the 90s as well. A lot of automatic legislation went in to try to prohibit or at least discourage people from carrying guns. So the drug pushers had what they call drug runners, And the runners always carried a loaded weapon because in case they were accosted by another gang that wanted to, take the product off of them, this was their way of shielding them from being mugged and having their stash stolen. So the legislatures passed an edict that if you're caught with a gun, no matter what other sentences you were going to get, there was an automatic extra year, in some places extra 5 years, if you were caught with a loaded gun. And if it was an unlicensed loaded gun, that even went up higher. What that did, though, was limit the ability of the drug dealer to distribute their product. And so they figured out that if they lowered the age of the drug runner to the 14 to 16 age group, if those drug runners got caught, because they were juvenile, they would only deal with the juvenile court system, and many of them would get very light sentences, or they would only be in for a year and then have, once they were released, they could start up their work again. When the older kids were getting arrested, because of these laws that put them behind bars for an extra 3 years or 5 years because they had a gun in the first place, they didn't come back on the street fast enough to help the drug runners, help the drug dealers have enough drug runners to push their product. So that was a well-intentioned legislation, but it kind of backfired. Because once you give a 12-year-old, a 14-year-old a loaded gun, their judgment is not as mature as it needs to be. I mean, we, on the side of injury prevention, like wearing a bike helmet to try to prevent head injury, we think that the brain is still developing, especially its executive function features, well into your 20s, 23, 24, 25. Nobody knows exactly for sure. These executive functions are the things like when you get into a fight or flight situation where something from your cortex in your brain can kind of put a damper on somebody just drawing a gun and shooting their way out of the problem. The 12-year-olds don't have that. The 14-year-olds don't have that. They look at the gun as a way to show that they are big men, that they are not afraid, and that they are dangerous. And they are. And so that's why we'll sometimes see 2, 3, 4 of them coming in at the same time. They're not great shots, fortunately, but they are, anxious and nervous, and also eager for proving themselves. And in order to do that, they will fire off their weapons much more readily than the older people will. So this is the kind of thing that the Board of Health wants to address, and I'm all for it. We're going to have several guest speakers that night talking about various programs that are in Worcester area now and working. And I hope you tune in for that. Again, it'll be on the government channel. If you go to www.worcesterma.gov, you can sign in either to be on a Zoom if you want to be really active, or just to watch it live streaming on YouTube. So to be honest, I think that's where I am going to end my August information for you. I'm looking forward to the rest of the month. I think it's going to be fun. I have my grandchildren coming to visit in the middle of the month, and that's the biggest joy that a grandpa can have, is when they're around. And one is only 18 months old. The other one is even younger at 1 year old. But they know who their grandpa is. So I'm really blessed that way. And I'm going to take full advantage of it because they're the most huggable little things. So thanks for listening. And we'll be back again next month with another edition of Stay Connected with the Worcester Senior Center. Have a great rest of the summer.